surgery and save yourselves hundreds of thousands of dollars in the various treatments for diabetes and heart disease and all sorts of other things that happen to people who are overweight. And it strikes me that this is a simple case of a cost-benefit analysis that just hasn't been done to work out that we would be better off if we did pay for more publicly funded weight loss surgeries.
What other pitfalls? I mean, I know you can drink the calories and the tummy can expand again, and many of us probably know a person or two for whom it didn't work. But and you've just outlined the benefits. How often do you reckon it does work from your experience?
Well,
most of the time?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the stats. I haven't.
The stats are hard to come by, and there's some dispute, as you can imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I know from personal experience and from some of the people around me that it has worked. You're right. There have been a few where it hasn't, and it's no substitute for eating and drinking less and doing more exercise. Yeah. But the immediate effects, and certainly around diabetes reduction, and the stats from overseas where there is better data, shows that it certainly reduces the amount of really expensive hospital care that people need in later lives, not to mention the lost production and all the other things that you get when you're overweight and not able to work.
And yet it would seem every time the subject comes up, Bernard, that it certainly does have its haters, the people who think if you hadn't eaten so much you wouldn't need the surgery. And this point of view resurfaces every time.
Yeah, it's similar in a way to the debate that we have about drugs and whether it's a medical issue or whether it's some sort of moral issue. It's clear, all the research shows that diets don't work for people who are overweight. We live in an obesogenic environment. Every billboard, every shop that you walk into is trying to sell you sugar, and not to mention lots of other things as well. And we've created a culture which is about making people overweight. So we shouldn't be too surprised when some people become overweight. And if you're going to have an across-the-board attack on this sort of high weight problems for many people, because it's not just a few people, it's a lot of people, then you should be doing lots of things. And weight loss surgery, of course, is a bit like the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but along with other things, it's something you do to attack this problem.
Well, it feels like it's also a little bit at the top, because then you're stopping the diabetes and the heart disease and stuff, so maybe it's the ambulance halfway down.
It's interesting, though, as you say, you have to think that people may conveniently forget whatever bad habits they may have that will, require public medical funding down the road. There are a lot of things that people do that are going to require that, but there is some extra judgmental process applied to bariatric surgery.
And I'd just like to say that I think, Paula Bennett is brave coming out and saying this and talking about it, and I think that's fantastic. Obviously, I'm a very staunch Labour supporter, but, and anybody that's fat-shaming her over this and making jokes about it is terrible. She did say, however, she made this comment: people treat you differently when you're overweight and when you're seriously overweight from when you're not. People have this perception of people who are overweight, that it's all in their own hands and they're just greedy people and they can't control how they eat. My husband made a little alteration to it and put on Facebook that said, I think people have this perception of people who are poor and that it's all in their own hands and that they're just lazy people and they can't control how they spend. So I'm just putting that out there for a little alternative to her thing on her ministerial portfolio.
How many rescues do you think you're entitled to on the public purse, do you think? One-time tattoos removal, one-time drug rehab, one-time gastric bypass? This is the other interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't want more than one gastric bypass.
No, but I think that we don't live in America and we have good public health funding, which is good.
I need one more topic to talk about before 5 o'clock, and it's got to be a quick one. Dunedin has a lot of redundant bus shelters now. I noticed today that its bus routes have changed, and these bus shelters are looking for new homes and new uses. Any ideas? Would you have one? Would it be like a bit like an old telephone box in the garden? Would you have an old bus shelter in your garden?
Tiny house. Maybe this is the thing you use for these things. Tiny houses are something New Zealand needs to come up with lots of them.
Yeah.
Is this the solution? This the Bernard Hickey solution for Auckland's housing?
That's right. Dunedin's bus terminals. Yeah.
The tiny houses of Auckland.
Whoever wants to buy them can do. I think it'd be fabulous to have something like that in the back of your garden.
Very, very good to talk to you both, and thank you for joining us on our first show of the year. Bernard Hickey, Penny Ashton.
Cheers.
Thank you very much for having me.
We are back tomorrow, and a Checkpoint with John Campbell coming up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Prime Minister says her government wants to make a fresh start at Waitangi this year, and she'll head north early next month and stay for 5 days. Jacinda Ardern says Waitangi is about more than just one day.
I want to make full use of the time when people are gathered there to meet together as a government that wants to form strong, open, transparent relationships. This is a fresh start for us.
Jacinda Ardern. The Ngāpuhi Kuia Te Whai Harawira will escort Ms Ardern onto the marae. Last year, when he was Prime Minister, Bill English boycotted Waitangi and spent the day in Auckland. Meanwhile, Ms Ardern has denied accidentally revealing the sex of her baby in a radio interview. Some media are reporting she let slip the secret on More FM, suggesting she referred to the baby with the pronoun her. Ms Ardern and her partner Clark Gayford know the baby's gender but have decided to keep it secret. Emergency services say it may be days before a full picture emerges of a fatal fire in South Dunedin early today. A man in the front flat of a Wesley Street house escaped the flames, but 2 people in the back flat died. A specialist fire investigator, Mark Bredenbeck, says the fire started in the back flat, but the cause is not yet known.
At this stage, we're going to treat it as unexplained, and until we know anything more, we won't be able to make that determination. The unexplained means that there's a fire that's occurred, and at this stage, we don't know what the cause of the fire. There's nothing obvious that jumps out at us to start with, so we're looking at all options, basically.
Mark Bredenbeck says the police are working to formally identify the 2 people who died. Anyone who saw or heard anything suspicious in the area at the time is asked to contact the police. The Chief Executive of the Taranaki District Health Board is confident the launch of a rural medical training program in Hawera will help attract donors to the province. 18 Year 5 Auckland University medical students were welcomed at Hawera Hospital today. They'll spend at least 6 weeks in Taranaki as part of a program designed to familiarise students with medical practice in a rural setting. Rosemary Clements says she hopes some will choose to return once they qualify as doctors.
I see these 50 years as key, as seeing that there's a life that they can have, a lifestyle in Taranaki, and a life once they're trained. They won't all come back, but if a proportion came back, that would be fabulous.
Rosemary Clements. More than 20 former students who took part in the same program in Northland have returned to work there. Major fuel companies are investigating why some motorists have been getting inaccurate fuel gauge readings. People have written on social media that they ran out of fuel despite their fuel gauge showing a quarter full tank. BP, Z and Mobil service stations say batches of 91 and 95 sold in November and December had elevated sulphur levels. A spokesperson for the 3 companies, Lee Taylor, says all fuel sold met regulated specifications, but a voluntary observed specification for active sulphur levels was exceeded in these batches.
It was fuel that was supplied to the industry, so that's supplied by Refining New Zealand. I would like to point out here that we don't know exactly what's occurred here and we're investigating at the moment, so we're not sure exactly what the cause has been.
Lee Taylor says most vehicles won't be affected, but anyone concerned about the accuracy of their fuel gauge should get their car checked by a mechanic. 5 fires broke out today at a 32-storey Auckland apartment building under construction, and the site is now being treated as a crime scene. Fire and Emergencies Area Commander Jeff Purcell says all 5 were extinguished by automatic sprinklers and dampened with hoses. He says about 40 firefighters have been checking the Albert Street building for more fires. It's 4 minutes past 5. The New Zealand cricketers' dominance of Pakistan has continued unabated in the first 2020 international in Wellington this afternoon. Beaten by the Black Caps in all 5 one-dayers, the visitors lost 4 wickets in the first 6 overs after being sent in to bat. A short time ago, they were struggling at 52 for 6 after 13 overs. Former Silver Ferns coach Yvonne Willering says the current team's starting lineup has become too predictable and needs an urgent shake-up. New Zealand suffered their 3rd loss to England in less than a year in the opening game of the Quad Series in London yesterday. Willering, who was coach from 1997 to 2001, says fresh thinking is needed.
Maybe we need to cut off the mess and the Folau combination. And yes, they're shooting well, but we're having difficulty getting the ball to them, and at times there are critical mistakes being made. So change the combination. Maybe put Folau into the back and put Selby Ricketts into, goal attack. That will add different responsibility to individual team members. Yvonne
Willering. New Zealand's Marcus Daniel is through to his first Grand Slam tennis quarter-final. Daniel and British partner Dominic Inglot scored a straight sets win in their men's doubles third-round match today. And the New England Patriots will play the Philadelphia Eagles in Super Bowl 52. Both teams won today's respective conference championship games. That's the news.
Breaking news.
There is still a large number of firefighters on the street dressed to battle a blaze.
Human interest.
By and large, I've felt overwhelmed by the messages of support.
We have blast off.
3, ignition.
Was it like one of those scenes in the Mission Control, you all sort of take your headsets off and do the high fives?
Yeah, it's exactly that.
It's not rocket science, but it's good to be back. Brian Espinett and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, will secondary school students have a deeper learning experience as the result of a shake-up to NCEA? And after 10, champion blind powerlifter Pa'i Nanai on overcoming anger and a difficult past. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Rain becoming widespread later today or overnight, with isolated thunderstorms and localised downpours easing later tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Manawatu, Gisborne to Wairarapa, occasional showers, some thundery with possible downpours during the afternoons and evenings, especially inland tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington, Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and northern Westland. Occasional rain clearing this afternoon or evening, then mostly fine with isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain or showers. Canterbury, cloudy periods today with isolated showers inland, possibly heavy, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, scattered showers today, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms inland. Fine tomorrow apart from showers in Southland after dark. And the Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle. It is 7.5 minutes past 5.
Tōti mai rā, I hoa mai, hei kōrero kei te haere, hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint for Monday, the 22nd of January. We are delighted to have your company. I have just raced down the stairs where I've been doing an interview with a correspondent from CNBC about the shutdown, which is remaining. Excuse me if I'm breathless, but we are bringing you the latest on that. Also tonight, the Labour caucus retreat to the Wairarapa to plan the year ahead. The case for more gastric bypass operations in the public health system. Dunedin Hospital, after a year the Southern DHB would rather forget. What is next? And when will it be? That shutdown? We have the latest. And the Women's March in the US and much, much more. Happy New Year, everybody, and happy anniversary day, Wellington. But let's begin tonight with unfolding news in central Auckland, where 5 separate fires at an inner-city Auckland apartment building still under construction are being treated as suspicious. The apartment building was scheduled to be finished in a month. Our reporter Laura Tupou is there. Laura, what can you tell us?
Well, this morning, John, fire were called to this address. It's on the corner of Albert Street and Swanson Street in downtown Auckland. It's a 32-storey building. As you say, it's 1 month till the end of construction. They were called to a fire at 20 to 11, and at the time, Area Commander Jeff Purcell told me that they thought it could have been accidental, but then they were then again called to four more fires this afternoon, just before 3 o'clock, and now they're treating all 5 as suspicious.
What are the police and fire services saying exactly, Laura?
So a fire investigator's on site. The fire crews have gone at their height. There were 13 fire trucks down here. They're in the building at the moment, just checking things over with the police, so both agencies are here. There's a handful of construction workers who have been hanging around, braving the rain for the past 3 hours when they've been kicked out of the site. So they tell me that they'll be heading back in probably within the hour to clean up the mess. So the fires were across 4 different floors, and so the sprinkler system was automatically activated, so that put out the fires initially. When fire came, they hosed down the area, so it will be quite damp on those 4 floors.
Laura Tupou live from the scene, so a large apartment complex, as you heard Laura say, a series of suspicious fires, and the police are now very explicit about that throughout the day. It is 10 minutes past 5. I've regained my breath. Magnificent athletic figure that I am. It was only 2 flights of stairs too. It was feeble, really. For a country of long, skinny islands, very few of us live any real kind of distance from the coast. Some of us are still not very sensible at the beach, though. And on Auckland's notoriously dangerous west coast, surf lifesavers are pleading for beachgoers to be responsible and swim between the flags. That's after they plucked 35 swimmers and surfers from the water over the weekend. That's just one beach. And lifeguards say most were ignoring really basic safety advice, much of it simply common sense. While it's obviously frustrating for those patrolling the beaches, Water Safety New Zealand says it's also disappointing the warnings about how dangerous New Zealand beaches can be are simply not getting through. Anusha Bradley reports.
Learner surfers, tourists and young families were among those getting into trouble at the weekend. A senior surf lifesaver at Bethel's Beach, James Kendrick, says 3 people had to be rescued after 5 o'clock, even though lifeguards had warned swimmers they were leaving for the day and they should get out of the water.
We closed the beach. People can see us leaving. About 5 of us lifeguards go into the water and advise them, saying, we're going home now, we've been here all day, and they continue to go in the water. And even though they might say to us, we're only going to go waist deep, we advise them that a wave will hit you and you'll go from waist deep to chest deep and then you'll drift out to sea.
He says many beachgoers aren't aware of the local conditions and the dangers they pose.
So like young kids were just getting picked up their feet and the parents weren't aware of how strong the currents were. So they were within the flagged area, but if they wandered out a certain distance and didn't follow our advice, they'd go out to sea.
Just south of Bethel's is Piha Beach, and it's a similar story. But this time, learner surfers are the ones getting into trouble.
They're all jumping in where those experienced guys were, straight into Paketi Rip, and then they get to the point where they're not experienced, they can't swim out, they can't swim back, they're stuck.
That's Brad Laloli from Piha's Surf Life Saving Club. He says anyone who's surfing at Piha for the first time should check with lifeguards about where they're best to go in order to keep safe, as they're flat out at this time of the year.
It's definitely busier. And we're only sort of halfway through the season, and we're definitely getting more rescues because we've had a lot of storms and it's changed, our beach in particular, it's changed the conditions on our beach.
3 people drowned during the official holiday period that ran from December 22nd to January 3rd, 5 fewer deaths than last year. But the Chief Executive of Water Safety New Zealand, John T. Mills, says the spike in surf rescues this weekend is disappointing because it shows the message is not getting through.
Those beaches, particularly out west of Auckland, are notoriously dangerous, and the lifeguards with Surf Lifesaving New Zealand do a fantastic job out there, and we do know that they're stretched. So people need to take some responsibility and be aware of those dangerous situations. It's interesting to note that in 102 years of surf lifesaving, they've never had a fatality on one of their patrol beaches between the flags. So it's very obvious where the safe places are, and that's what people need to get that message.
John T. Mills is hopeful a capability review of the whole water safety sector that's underway will persuade the government to open its wallet a little wider for water safety organisations like Surf Lifesaving.
We know that the sector is stretched beyond its capability, and we know that there is an increased demand and an increase in expectation from the water safety sector, the likes of Surf Lifesaving being a good example. And so we certainly need to make the authorities aware of that.
That review will be completed in the next few months. In the meantime, surf lifesavers are pleading for beachgoers to be responsible and always swim between the flags as Aucklanders flock to the region's west coast beaches over the next 2 long weekends. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The Labour caucus has been holding its beginning of the year retreat in the Wairarapa. Our political reporter May Heron has been there, and we will speak to May later in the program. But a chorus of voices are calling for the government to fund more gastric bypass surgeries after Nationals Deputy Paula Bennett revealed she'd had the operation privately last year. Now, taxpayers have paid for roughly 400 people in the past year to have the weight loss surgery. That's up from 120 in 2008, roughly $20,000 a pop, but more are sought. Here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
Paula Bennett's just the latest in a string of politicians who have had the surgery, which effectively shrinks the size of a person's stomach. Dame Tariana Turia, founder of the Māori Party, spoke publicly about her operation in 2009, an operation she says changed her life.
I no longer have diabetes. I've been well ever since, lost a huge amount of weight, and I think that me doing that has saved taxpayers money for the last 10 to 15 years.
Her successor as co-leader of the Māori Party, Marama Fox, tells a similar story after years battling to lose weight.
I was very sick in my last pregnancy. I just about stopped breathing a couple of times. I did stop breathing a couple of times during that pregnancy, and I knew if I didn't do something that I wouldn't see my daughter grow up or my grandchildren.
She tried to go down the public route, but didn't meet the criteria. So in 2014, she paid to have the operation performed privately.
People think I mainline Red Bull, but I've just lost weight. And so I have so much energy. I can get down on the ground and play with my children, run around cleaning up the house at 3 o'clock in the morning because I've still got energy to burn. And so it's been fantastic.
Less so the $26,000 price tag. She's still paying back the loan today. She thinks the government should pay for more operations and subsidise others to make it more affordable.
You can literally have bariatric surgery, and within a year or two, the majority of the illnesses related to obesity will be gone. No further ongoing costs and burden to the country.
Anything that helps people to manage their situation better, it should be done.
Dame Tariana Turia says it'll save the country money in the long run.
We actually spend a lot of money on different treatments and we don't count the cost. So why do we count the cost? Simply because we have an attitude about obesity and diabetes.
The cost isn't everything though. Dr Robin Tumath says it's also about saving lives.
Every day on my ward round, I see people who have terrible medical problems related to morbid obesity. And I think to myself quietly, oh my goodness, I wish you had been offered a gastric bypass operation 10, 15 years ago.
The Auckland physician is a long-time campaigner for fighting obesity. She wrote a book called Fat Science and says people have very little control over their body size.
People who are predisposed to morbid obesity are not going to be able to go on a diet, are not going to be able to take extra walks around the block and deal with this themselves. They need surgery.
But don't expect any big funding announcements from the government. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's sought some advice, but thinks the current process is working.
There is, with any surgery, pluses and minuses to this option, and it's quite difficult to get the balance right.
As for Paula Bennett, she says she feels great about her decision and doesn't care what people think. She says, and I quote, "Haters can hate. Atu iti whare parimata mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Craig McCulloch.
Public health issue, we would love your feedback on this. Text us 2101, checkpoint at radionz.co.nz remains our email address. Of course, we are on Facebook where you can watch us live with our flash new graphics made by Rangi Powick. And what else? At Checkpoint RNZ on Twitter. Lots of people welcoming us back. Thank you. We're delighted to be back with you. To the United States now, where hundreds of thousands of people have rallied in what's called the Women's March, although that's a slight misnomer in some cases, where freezing weather conditions and stadium venues have meant not much marching in some places. The largest rallies were yesterday in Washington, New York, LA and Chicago. 250,000 people in Chicago alone. The big picture here is women's rights, of course, and a loud and declaratory voice against the Trump presidency, but there's a mobilisation objective too. With midterm elections approaching, organisers want to encourage more women to vote. In the 2016 presidential election, women went for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump by a fairly large margin, 54-42. But in some crucial swing states, the turnout was lower than many had predicted. Today's largest rally was in Las Vegas, and CNN's Sarah Sidner was there. I spoke to Sarah earlier this afternoon.
So this was a large group of people, both a large group of speakers, everyone from Linda Sarsour, who was one of the first people to come up with the idea of the Women's March, and she's one of the national leaders, to share the famous entertainer that the entire world knows,
Yep.
Singer and actress. But you also had women from all different walks of life who showed up in Las Vegas. Some came by buses, some came by car. This was not a march, although it's called the Women's March. It was a rally, and purposely a rally. They had it in a huge stadium where thousands of women showed up and listened to the message that was sent out. And really the message was about power to the polls. They want people to start thinking strategically, not just marching, not just using social media, not just talking about it with friends and family. They want people to start thinking about who they want in office, and they want to make sure that all of this translates to votes, especially with midterm elections this year. And in Nevada, in particular, it's in June of 2018. They want people to get out to those polls and put people who have their same thought process and their same ideals in place. John?
Yeah, Nevada's a fascinating state, isn't it? Because Clinton won in the 2016 presidential election campaign, but it was narrow. I think from memory it was 48-45. She got 6 electoral college votes. There's a big and highly unionised service workforce there, isn't there? And their turnout's going to be crucial.
Absolutely, and they certainly had somebody from the SEIU who came and spoke to the crowd. That was by design. Their whole idea this year, as opposed to last year, was this is about strategic placing of people and talking to those voters in particularly swing states, which Nevada is still a swing state. Although, as you mentioned, it did sway to Hillary Clinton. They recognize that. They also recognize that this is the second largest number of women in office in all 50 states here in Nevada. So they have targeted certain places. And look, we're taking this. We're going to go to Pennsylvania. We're going to go to Ohio. So they are looking strategically at different places where they believe they can flip seats. And that is really what a lot of this is about, beyond the messages. And there are many messages, John. We heard a message that really made the entire crowd get quiet. We're talking about thousands of people. The crowd got quiet when a woman came to the front and she said, look, I've never done this before. You could tell she was nervous. Her voice was quivering. But it turned out that she had survived the Las Vegas shooting, which is the worst mass shooting in modern history here in the United States. And that just happened back in October. And she said, look, I was hit by bullets, but I was injured, and I'm still living with this fear. And she said, I learned from that experience that I had to fight, and she wants to see gun control. So you had a lot of different ideas being put out to the crowd and things that they want people to concentrate on when it comes to their representatives.
It's CNN's Sarah Sidner talking to us earlier this afternoon from Las Vegas. She had been at the rally. We're going to stay in the US where government services are on shutdown, and we have a correspondent. I was speaking to her just as we went to air at 5 o'clock. We've trimmed that up and it's ready to go in about 45 seconds. But if you call the comment line at the White House, and people frequently do, you won't get the normal response. The line's voicemail message was changed on Saturday. Remember, this is the official residence and workplace of the President of the United States. All of the presidents of the United States. And as they work so far unsuccessfully towards some kind of bipartisan solution to the shutdown, and we'll have more on that in a sec, you'd expect something dispassionate and conciliatory, right, from the phone line at the White House? Wrong.
Thank you for calling the White House. Unfortunately, we cannot answer your call today because congressional Democrats are holding government funding, including funding for our troops and other national security priorities, hostage to an unrelated immigration debate. Due to this obstruction, the government is shut down. In the meantime, you can leave a comment for the President at www.whitehouse.gov/contact. We look forward to taking your calls as soon as the government reopens.
This is pretty bizarre and no breakthrough tonight. Remember, it's Sunday night in the US as the government shutdown enters its third day, but crucially enters a Monday. An attempt to reach a compromise failed just a few hours ago. There were hopes early in the negotiation between senior Republican and Democrat senators that something might come of it. It didn't. The vote is now postponed till Monday as Democrats stand their ground on immigration protections. Now, Christina Wilkie covers the White House for CNBC. She was waiting and waiting for some kind of resolution. There wasn't one. Very late, I think it's about midnight there now, she describes the ongoing stalemate as a fundamental breakdown in trust.
The reason that nothing happened tonight, which we all were led to believe would be a breakthrough, is that, frankly, senior Republicans could not guarantee what the president would do or what he would agree to, and senior Democrats were really holding out for a series of promised immigration reform, decided that they could not take the word of the senior Republicans without something more concrete. And it's really, now it comes down to personalities.
And if it comes down to personalities, and the Republicans are trying to second-guess their own president, who is almost, on the face of it, unsecond-guessable, what will resolve this impasse?
That depends on who you ask. If you ask the president, Democrats will be broken. They will recognize that they are paying a very high price politically, which they are. To the American public, there is little doubt that Democrats have decided to shut down the government until they can get guarantees, true guarantees, that these 800,000 plus young people who were brought to the United States, we know them as the Dreamers or the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, this DACA, but these young people will not be deported, and they believe this is their best last stand to get guaranteed protections for these young people, which President Trump canceled last fall. So those they need this, and they've decided to, as we say, to die on this hill in politics. But if you ask, Senate Republicans, Democrats should be fine. They ought to be okay with being guaranteed, well, how about we open the government for a little while, for another 3 weeks, vote for it, and then we'll give you your protections. And I think senior Democrats have heard this a few too many times. And unlike with previous presidents, whether it was Obama or Ronald Reagan or even President Bill Clinton, President Donald Trump is not a very reliable negotiator. So that the stakes are far higher on that front.
Absolutely fascinating state of affairs, isn't it? That's Christina Wilkie, who is CNBC's Washington correspondent. I was speaking to her about 26 minutes ago, and very late on Sunday night there. So it has not been resolved. And the week will commence in the US with the government shut down. Health authorities back in New Zealand are hoping the expansion of a regional rural medical training program into Taranaki today could form part of a long-term solution to doctor shortages in the provinces. Taranaki, for example, 18 Year 5 medical students from Auckland University were given a taste of Taranaki life this morning when they were welcomed at Hawera Hospital. Last year, of course, we covered the doctor shortage in this region and elsewhere. Well, our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin was there today as the new recruits rolled in.
Taranaki, and in particular South Taranaki, has long-standing problems attracting and retaining GPs. The issue peaked last year when Pātea was without a GP for 4 months. In North Taranaki, there is also a looming crisis with more than a dozen sole-charge GPs nearing retirement age. It's hoped the launch of the Auckland University program will not only give the students a taste of rural practice, but also influence some to return to the province to work. The chief executive of the Taranaki DHB, Rosemary Clements, says the rural medical landscape is changing and careers in the provinces will not be so onerous in the future.
The conventional model of being a GP, of being a specialist, is actually coming to a natural end. People don't want to work the hours that they used to have to work as a GP. In rural land, they don't want to be around for 24/7. They want to have a life as well. So it's about getting a model of care put together that will work for everybody.
Ms Clements says the Auckland scheme piggybacks on the postgraduate rural hospital medicine training program, which has been up and running at Hawera Hospital for about 4 years.
And I see these 50 years as key, as seeing that there's a life that they can have, a lifestyle in Taranaki, and a life once they're trained in whatever they choose to do. They won't all come back, but if a proportion came back, that would be fabulous.
The Auckland University's Vice-Chancellor Māori, Jim Peters, says the rural training program had been a huge success in Northland and the Bay of Plenty, and he expected Taranaki would be no different.
In the case of the Northland scheme, which is Pukauakaua, over 20 of those past students are now back in the north as in medical services or as doctors. So the benefit to the local community with the introduction to what rural life is like and how pleasant it is and how long term it's of value is likely to be the same here.
Mr. Peters says the students will benefit from seeing a wide range of medical issues in one place.
In the large hospitals, there does tend to be a more specialised approach, and that may not be to the students' advantage so early in their career. But when they're working in the rural context, they see the total range of medical incidents and the need for medical treatment.
The students will each spend at least 6 weeks working in Taranaki, and Aucklander Maria G is looking forward to the experience.
Actually, unless you've been in these areas and you've met the people and you've worked with the people and you've had that kind of practical experience on the ground, it is very hard to feel connected to a space. And I think this is very unparalleled in the sense of the various experiences we have as a student in terms of getting that kind of connection and kind of growing to love the place where you may want to work someday.
Wellingtonian Brianna Wu admits to a little trepidation.
I've been on holiday here a few times, so I really only know the touristy thing.
What most worries you, what most scares you about coming to Taranaki?
Probably distance from friends and family and a totally new environment, so scary.
But local lad Michael Hayton says the experience will be great for his fellow students.
A number of the people that have come here are definitely from big places, Auckland and Wellington, Christchurch, and they haven't been to a small place, they haven't even been to Taranaki, so for them it's a huge opportunity to actually see what it's like to work and live here, and I definitely think it's important for them.
A total of 34 medical students will work at Hawara Hospital this year, with a balance of their time being spent at Taranaki Base Hospital in New Plymouth. In Taranaki for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin Aho.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program, detectives call for witnesses after a suspicious fire killed 2 people in a Dunedin house this morning. 5 people have been seriously injured after a Sydney train failed to brake. And Met Service meteorologist John Law will join us for the first time with his daily weather report. This is a new feature on Checkpoint. Nona here with our first business news of the year. We would love your feedback, and we're getting a lot of it already on gastric bypass surgery in the public system. Thank you. You can email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Text us on 2101, and we are, of course, as we tell you, 4,387 times a night on Facebook and Twitter. Here is Happy New Year, Katrina Batten.
Happy New Year, John Campbell.
Katrina with the 5:30 headlines.
The Prime Minister says Waitangi Day is a fresh start for the government, and she'll stay in Northland for almost a week. Jacinda Ardern says Waitangi is about the Crown's relationship with the province rather than celebrating just one day. 3 big fuel companies are looking into why some drivers are reporting inaccurate readings on their fuel gauges. People have said on social media that even though their gauge showed their tanks were quarter full, they still ran out of fuel. BPZ and Mobil service stations say some batches of petrol sold in late last year exceeded a specification for sulphur levels, but all fuel sold met regulated specifications. Emergency services say it may take days to investigate a fatal fire in South Dunedin early today. A man in the front flat of a Wesley Street house escaped the flames, but 2 people in the back flat died. The police are calling for witnesses who may have seen or heard anything suspicious around 5:30 this morning. They're still working to formally identify the 2 people who died. Fires at a 32-storey apartment block under construction in central Auckland are being treated as suspicious. All 5 fires in the Albert Street building have been put out by automatic sprinklers, and firefighters dampened them down with hoses. The Chief Executive of the Taranaki District Health Board is confident the launch of a rural medical training program in Hawara will help attract doctors to the province. 18 Year 5 Auckland University medical students were welcomed at Hawara Hospital today. They'll spend at least 6 weeks in Taranaki as part of a program designed to familiarise students with medical practice in a rural setting. New Zealand continues to dominate Pakistan in the first 2020 International in Wellington today. After being beaten by the Black Caps in all 5 of their one-day matches, the visitors lost 4 wickets in the first 6 overs after being sent into bat. A short time ago, they were at 93 for 9 after 19 overs. Those are the headlines.
I'm beginning to wonder why they brought the top of their order with them.
Right,
They've contributed so little.
just useless.
Useless.
Useless. That's not a little much, is it?
Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona. Hi, Nona. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everyone.
I just want to know, when you go back to Canada for Christmas as you did, is that going home, or when you return to New Zealand afterwards, is that coming home?
Well, it's both, John. It's both. I'm so lucky, aren't I? Yes, indeed.
Well, we're delighted you're back. The dairy cooperative Fonterra, disappointed with the performance of its Chinese partner. Is its name really Being Mate?
Being Mate is its name,
it's
yes,
the
indeed.
Stupidest name in the history of business, isn't it?
Well, that might be the least of their problems.
The company's downgraded its earnings forecast. It's going to make a bigger full-year loss. What's been Fonterra's reaction to that, Nona?
Well, not very good. They're very disappointed, and not only because this has been going on for a while. They bought this company with high hopes that this would be a way of them really having a solid partner in China, taking advantage of the opportunities a Chinese partner would bring. For example, one of the things that Fonterra was hoping for was this registration of dairy recipes. You know, that had to be approved by January 1. Being Mate, being on the ground, actually had a lot of their recipes approved, over 50 of them. But Fonterra said in their media release this afternoon that Being Mate hasn't taken advantage of the opportunities posed by those early registrations. So what does that mean? We don't really know yet. What impact that's going to have, again, we don't know. The other thing that they raised is an issue, in addition to the losses that the company has announced, is that the directors of the board have raised some concerns about some aspects of the financial reporting of the company. So I guess we're going to hear a lot more when the company reports its interim result in March. That's probably about mid-March when we're going to get that. The market's reaction has been somewhat muted. I mean, the share price fell about 0.75%, and that's on an up day. So yeah, they fell, what, 5 cents to $6.47.
Yeah, that is.
That's the Fonterra fund.
It's anniversary day in Wellington, so the markets will be quiet today anyway, as
Yeah,
well, wouldn't
exactly.
it?
Yeah. So there's that. But yeah, overall, you know, it's a disappointing thing for Fonterra. They didn't make any bones about that.
No.
Yeah. So
NZX released the feedback on its plans to revise the market's listing rules.
Yeah, actually, revitalize might have been a good word to use there, because that's really the reason why they're reviewing those listing rules. Now, they haven't been reviewed since 2003, so there's been a lot of change going on. You know, it's interesting. So they announced this last week. It's not that this is old news, but one of the things that was raised by a number of submissions to the first round of feedback was this idea that at an annual meeting, you have to have a show of hands to count votes. And some of the submitters said, look, this is ridiculous. Like, come on, one vote, one share, one vote, and every vote counts. No more of this turn up at a meeting with some proxies. That's just totally antiquated. Yeah. And that needs to be banned, that all companies should be counting everybody's votes, not just who turns up at a meeting with a handful of proxies to, So. Yeah,
that does rather predate the internet, doesn't it?
It does seem so. So that's an example.
I reckon the internet might stick around.
But there were much bigger fish to fry than that. I mean, that's an important one. But the other issues were much. You know, there was a number of other issues, and we spoke with Mark Lister today and a number of other people who have had an interest in this. And he said, look, don't expect anything to happen in the immediate term. This is a long-term thing. But we have some audio from him, and perhaps we can hear that.
It's not going to make any huge difference overnight. We definitely do need to see more listings. You've got KiwiSaver money that's growing every week, and you're not seeing any of those bigger companies come to market. So if you did see some more activity at the smaller and the medium end of town, then that would absolutely be good for investors. It'd be good for the capital markets. We've seen quite a few companies end up in offshore hands over the last few years, and we need to do something, I guess, as a capital markets group of participants and the NZX and the government all together to try and ensure that these growing, exciting companies see the NZX as a viable place to get their capital.
That's the head of wealth research at Craig's Investment Partners, Mark Lister. What else happened on the markets today? So Fonterra just off a tiny bit, about 5 cents. What else was going on?
Well, overall the index rose more than 0.5%. Quite a strong day. But again, Wellington was closed. Yeah. So we rose about 45 points to 8,335, and that was against a backdrop of some uncertainty over what's going on with the U.S. With the basically the bill that failed to pass, which would have kept government funding going. So it's hard to know whether that's going to have any impact. I guess we'll know more once the U.S. market opens.
That is a particularly micro U.S. situation, though, isn't it?
It is, but it does strike the market in terms of confidence.
Yeah.
If you've got a president that can't get through that kind of a bill, then it does tend to point to leadership issues, and that does unease people for sure. And of course, our dollar is steady. It's been holding on to its gains at 72.8 US cents, 91.1 cents Australian, and 52.5 pence.
Thanks, Nona. What was weather like in Canada? Where are you? You're from Winnipeg, aren't you?
That's one of the coldest places. What is it? Colder? What's the word? Colder than Mars? Actually, we have a Winnipeg Mars, so that goes to tell you how cold it really was. It was some days with the wind chill like minus 50.
Holy moly.
Very, very, very
So you
cold.
just wouldn't go outside at all?
Well, no, you actually do get out, but you just don't stay out very long.
Lovely to have you back. Lovely to have you back home, Nona. Thank you very much. Nona Peltier doing business, part of our excellent business team that joins us each night at about 5:33 throughout the year. Let's go to the weather now. We were talking about it in Canada. If you're watching us live on Facebook, YouTube or Sky Channel 83 or Freeview Channel 50, you can watch us in lots of places. Each night we're going to be joined by Met Service meteorologist John Law, who will give us a Met Service weather report every night at about this time. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora everyone. We have still got some showers in store for Tuesday and a severe weather watch in place for parts of the north and the western parts of the North Island. For Auckland, a showery start, but getting better towards evening and still staying pretty warm. More showers in store widely across the North Island, with some showers or longer spells of rain expected for the central parts of the North Island, perhaps even one or two rumbles of thunder as well. For Wellington and the Kapiti Coast, generally a drier start today, still rather cloudy, but brightening up for the afternoon. And temperatures in Wellington still up to around about 25 degrees Celsius. But those showers will be the order of the day across many parts of the North Island, even across on towards the eastern coast. Down south, there's plenty of dry weather in store for Canterbury. A rather cloudy start around the Canterbury coast, but brightening up through the afternoon. Temperatures back up to around 26, 27 degrees Celsius for Christchurch. And for many places, it's a fine story on the South Island throughout Tuesday. Just more cloud on the western coast and back into the south later on. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, John. If you were listening and not watching, you wouldn't have seen that Invercargill was heading back towards the late 20s again. Got over 30 there last week. John forecasting a high of 29 for tomorrow. Quite extraordinary weather. Detectives are calling for any sightings of suspicious behaviour in South Dunedin this morning as investigators search for the cause of a fatal house fire. 2 people were found dead in a flat in Wesley Street after the blaze tore through the home shortly after 5 o'clock this morning. Our reporter Timothy Brown was at the scene and has filed this report.
Flames poured out of the wooden villa, illuminating the tight South Dunedin street. Firefighters made their way through the Warren-like streets of the suburb to find the rear flat of the property well ablaze. Specialist fire investigator Mark Bredenbeck says it was after entering the flat that the horror of the blaze became clear.
Unfortunately, 2 people haven't been able to make it out of this fire, hence the reason that the police are involved. They were alerted to the fact that there may have been 2 people in the flat, and they've then subsequently found them where they were.
Mark Bredenbeck did not want to comment on where the bodies were located or if it appeared they had attempted to escape the blaze. However, he revealed it could have been worse. An elderly man who lived alone at the flat at the front of the property was awoken when the blaze set off a fire alarm. Mr. Bredenbeck says it's clear the fire started in the rear flat, though it is not known what caused it at this stage. A neighbour, Dylan Ryle, says he was getting ready for work when his stepmother rushed into his home and told him to call firefighters.
So we just saw smoke coming off the roof, and then probably a minute after that the windows started blowing out and flames were flying out.
Dylan Ryle says his stepmother Mel rushed to help the elderly occupant of the front flat.
He was out on his porch crying, and that, so she helped him get away from the house and woke the neighbours. He usually has a walking frame, but he left it in the house, so Mel helped him get across the road. He seemed a bit shaken up, he was crying and stuff. So.
He says despite the best efforts of neighbours, the heat of the blaze prevented them from accessing the rear flat. The blaze also woke others on the street. One woman says she was startled by her dog.
My dog started barking and I thought there was someone at the door, and I came out and then I saw the smoke, the fire, and I thought, and then I saw the lights.
Wesley Street resident Shane Corson says he and his wife were at home when the fire engines went past.
We were at home. Yep. All I saw was a fire engine go past, and next minute looked out, and next minute you could see flames shooting out of the window just up there. I actually heard the window smash, and I heard a bang. And then I smelled smoke, so I looked and put my head out the window. Next minute you see all flames shooting out of the window.
Shane Corson says neighbours have seen fires burning at the rear of the property in the past. Detective Senior Sergeant Callum Crowdis of Dunedin CIB says police want to hear from anyone who saw or heard anything suspicious in the area about the time of the fire. Callum Crowdis says the fire is being treated as unexplained. Police are working to formally identify the deceased. Cordons are expected to remain in place for much of today as investigations continue and access is open only to residents. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
We talked about gastric surgery earlier. A report from the gallery, of course, following Paula Bennett's announcement that she had it at the end of last year, gastric bypass surgery to reduce the size of your stomach to help you lose weight. Lots of feedback coming in on it. It's fairly split in terms of public funding for it. Gastric surgery, I don't mind the surgery and fund the hell out of it. Awesome results. But what about regulation of dietary food that contributes to obesity? It's a modern disease that we created. Tackle it from both ends. This listener says, for God's sake, don't advocate gastric surgery except in severe cases. Resources should be put into making real food, spelt in capitals, more accessible and advocated instead of adulterated rubbish they call food. Low-fat cereals, bread, etc. And this person says, hi John, regarding gastric bypass surgery, I've been overweight and have many obese or formerly obese relatives who would likely be dubbed as having a genetic predisposition to weight gain. My question is, what if one has made their personal health a priority over, let's say, personal career ambitions and have therefore likely foregone earnings over their lifespan but place less burden on the public health system? Why make such an effort? That is a big philosophical question, that one, isn't it? Who should get public health care? I guess if that was your criteria, there would be lots of people you would deny it because of behavioural things, and that is not how the public health system works, but it is a really good discussion point. Thank you for your feedback. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint at Radio NZ, and we are, of course, on Facebook. We were just in Dunedin with Timothy Brown and that house fire. Let's stay there. Last year, one of the stories Checkpoint covered at greatest length was the crisis in the urology department in the Southern DHB. Indeed, there were pressures in other areas of Dunedin Hospital, but those in the urology department culminated in an external review and revelations on Checkpoint that prostate cancer patients had suffered seriously problematic delays to their treatment. All of this happens, of course, as the ageing and overwhelmed Dunedin Hospital nears the end of its life. A replacement to come, exactly where and when still to be exactly confirmed. Among those working on the planning, Pete Hodgson, a former health minister under Helen Clark, and Dunedin North MP. Both of those positions, incidentally, are now held by David Clark. Now, Pete Hodgson is chair of the Southern Partnership Group, and he's also put together a local advisory group that's meeting for the first time tomorrow.
Well, it's a group that's ancillary to the main consultative group, the so-called Southern Partnership Group, and it's designed to take a look at stuff that isn't health. So, for example, what's the impact of this very large new hospital going to be on transport or public transport or access to pedestrians? What do we do about, let's call it cityscape or land, the streetscape, or the things that are where the building is going to impact on the rest of the city. We need to make sure it doesn't cast too long a shadow. We need to make sure that if there's going to be a district heating scheme, that it's something that embraces the hospital and other businesses as well, and so on and so on. So a bunch of things that are to do with building the hospital, but not necessarily, in fact, not at all, to do with the health or health provision parts of building a hospital.
Right, much easier to have those conversations when you know where the hospital's going, right? Do you have a preferred site?
We don't yet, but we will rather shortly.
Do you have one? Do you personally have one? Gosh, you've been health minister. You were the minister there for about 200 or 300 years, weren't you?
No,
sorry, the
I
MP there.
I know roughly where it's going to be. I know roughly in which few blocks it's likely to end up. But there are quite a few permutations, and so which few blocks? Which few blocks? Well, we haven't narrowed it down yet, John. So we're not about to tell you breathlessly on on your Mighty Fine radio program, but I can tell you that it'll be north of the Octagon, south of the hospital, on flat land, and probably, as the current hospital is, alongside State Highway 1 on one side or even on both sides. So people who know Dunedin,
I know Dunedin, and that's not a big.
Dunedin.
I know, and that's not a big area you're talking about. So that's actually pretty specific,
So we are getting it narrowed down,
Yeah.
but I'm asking people also to remember that it might be over 2 blocks. Not that we need all of 2 blocks, but parts of 2 blocks, or just think laterally that it doesn't have to be in this great big rectangle or that great big rectangle. It can be a mixture of those things. In fact, the current hospital is also across more than 1 block.
Yeah, it is. Can we talk about how much money you need? I think the ODT called it a $100 million sticking plaster, right? Until that hospital will be open in roughly 7 to 10 years' time. Is a huge funding injection required simply to keep Dunedin Hospital stumbling on?
Well, it's not clear to me that that will be the amount of money required. I simply don't know. And it's not the project that I'm engaged with, though you do raise an important point, because the sooner we can get this new hospital up, the lesser time that we need to put, as you call it, sticking plasters on our existing hospital. And yet, even by the very best of intentions, there are certainly some things that will have to happen in the existing hospital. There are parts of that hospital that are really very crowded indeed.
Yeah, there are. If we look back to June 2015, I suspect you're not going to be remotely interested in commenting on this. This is when David Clark's predecessor as Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, sacked the DHB and appointed a commissioner there. And he said Health Minister Jonathan Coleman has today written to Southern DHB dismissing all members of the board and replacing it with a commissioner. Now, all the imperatives, all the justifications were around financial reasons. Since then, we've had the crisis in urology, we've had the really confusing waiting lists in cardiac surgery, we've had the shortages in ICU beds, we've had deficits, we now need a $100 million sticking plaster. Is it your sense that the commissioner should be staying on?
It isn't for me to comment. You're quite right, and I know the limitations, having been a minister in an earlier time, that it's not a very wise idea to pretend being minister now. So I'll gently sidestep your question. But with this remark, John, and that is that though there's plenty still to be done at the main Dunedin Public Hospital site, there is still some serious crowding. There's also coming up a brand new ICU facility, a brand new gastro facility, and so on. So there are some investments that have been made that will make things better. The point that you're making is that not all of those things have been done, and that's quite right. There's still there will be a shortage of beds in the ICU space this coming winter, I have no doubt.
One final question.
I'm sorry, in the ED.
No, absolutely. Sorry. Yeah. One final question in terms of local representation. Tim Cadogan and Gary Kircher, who are regional mayors, and you're not going to die wondering what either of them think. And they're frequent guests on Checkpoint, and they have the delightful quality of stabbing you in the front. They are saying, hey, this isn't really local representation, because don't forget, this isn't just a Dunedin hospital, it's a regional hospital. Should you have one of those mayors on your advisory group?
So I've spoken to those two guys, and in fact the other regional mayors in Otago, though not yet the regional mayors in Southland, who will no doubt ring me when they hear me talking, to say, give over, guys. This is substantially a Dunedin business. The issue about Dunedin's cityscape and streetscape is not an issue, or transport problems or whatever, is not an issue for the mighty fine mayors of Oamaru or Alex. And indeed, as I say, I've spoken to all of them, to the mayors of Queenstown, Lakes and Clutha District as well. And you can ring them and get your own view, but because we're in dialogue, I think there is a level of trust. There is a sense that they have that they can ring me. They've all got my number. They all know what the local advisory group's about and what it isn't about. They've all said we need to make sure that there's good parking facilities for out-of-town travellers. You better not forget that, Pete, etc. No, I don't need all 4 of them or any one of them on this local advisory group. It's not a representational body. It's a group designed to get things done and get decisions taken as quickly as we can. And yet, if we think there's anything that's of regional consequence, I'll be the first to be back in touch with them.
Pete Hodgson, who is the chair of that advisory group and the Southern Partnership Group, of course. We will keep an eye on where Dunedin Hospital is going, although fairly precisely mapped out, I thought, by Pete Hodgson there, particularly if you know that part of Dunedin, that isn't much room he is talking about. Just before we move on, the cricket, Pakistan, boy, they're having a miserable tour of New Zealand, and I'm old enough to remember when Pakistani visitors posed a magnificent threat to the New Zealand side when they came here, but they were all out in a 2020 game for 105, which is just woeful. Once again, their top order made you wonder why they actually bother to carry a bat out to the middle. But Pakistan have struck, getting the really important wicket of Markan Guptill, and the Black Caps 3 for 1 a couple of minutes ago. So Pakistan descending 105, had to take wickets early on. They've taken a very important one. It's 5 minutes to 6 exactly. 5 people have been seriously injured in Sydney after a train failed to brake and hit a barrier at Richmond in the city's northwest this morning. Initial reports suggested the train derailed, but Sydney Trains later confirmed the train had remained on the rails. The ABC's Sarah White has been following the story.
The train was going at about 10 o'clock this morning on the Richmond line. This is actually the end of the train line, and it ran into it and didn't stop. This caused a number of injuries. It crashed at force, and here's Howard Collins, who's the Chief Executive of Sydney Trains.
We understand the train on platform 2 at Richmond has hit the buffers pretty hard. I'm going back now to our control centre to find out some more information. It is a Waratah train, it's one of our new trains, so we'll have a lot of good information about the train. It is early to say. My first thoughts are those people who have suffered some form of injury. We don't believe any of those are life-threatening or serious. It's reports of cuts and bruises, maybe suspected broken ribs.
There's about 13 that have been injured. That's mainly minor injuries, but there have been 2 reported spinal injuries. There was also a reported 1 hip injury and someone upset their collarbone. 3 people were flown for treatment. There were helicopters on the scene. At 10:30, it was reported that 3 people had been trapped in the train, but by 11, they'd been moved out. Here is Howard Collins saying he's going to be investigating what caused the crash in the coming days.
It is obviously very concerning, and the first concern is for those people who have been involved with the incident and obviously making sure those people are safe, recovered. I'm sure the emergency services are doing what they do best, which is look after those people and get them the treatment they deserve.
There's been so many issues with Sydney Trains this month. Earlier, all the timetables were mixed up. A lot of train services were cancelled. There were 40 train services cancelled, which put chaos for Sydney commuters. Now there's a threatened strike. There's a strike maybe scheduled for Monday next week. Negotiations are going on, so Howard Collins, of course, had to rush from the negotiations he's having with the union to get to this train crash, and it's just not looking great for Sydney Trains at the moment.
The ABC's Sarah White reporting from Sydney. At least 30 people are now known to have been killed after militants launched an attack on the Intercontinental Hotel in Kabul, Afghanistan, of course, late on Saturday night. Gunmen in army uniforms burst into the hotel and battled Afghan special forces through the night. The dead included hotel staff and guests, as well as members of the security forces who fought the attackers. All 5 attackers were also killed, according to Afghanistan's Interior Minister. The BBC's Zia Sharia reports.
The final moments of a fight that had lasted all night. Gunfire and explosions as Afghan special forces battled to regain control of the Intercontinental Hotel. One soldier throws a grenade. He moves away, then the explosion. The room is soon on fire, evidence of the struggle that had taken place. The Afghan national flag waving from the roof, proof that the building has been retaken.
Part of the hotel was burned and black smoke has blackened the southern part of the hotel.
More than 150 people, including some foreigners, were inside when gunmen burst in and opened fire. Eyewitnesses said they were after foreigners.
The attackers were knocking on the door of each room trying to reach their targets. They killed ordinary people and officials. They were also targeting foreigners.
Images filmed by local TV showed people escaping by climbing down bed sheets that they tied to balconies. This telecoms engineer fell from the 6th floor as he tried to get away.
When the 6th floor caught fire this morning, my roommates told me to either burn or escape. I got a bed sheet and tied it onto the balcony. I tried to come down, but I was heavy and my arms were not strong enough. I fell down and injured my shoulder and leg.
This sustained and complex assault will prompt urgent questions as to how the gunman got through.
Yes, indeed, very urgent questions. The BBC's Zia Sharia reporting from Campbell. 30 seconds before 6. Lots of you welcoming us back. Thank you very much. We are delighted to be back and we're thrilled to hear from you. Lots of feedback coming in tonight. We should say after 6 o'clock, Edward Gay, who is a fantastic reporter here in Auckland, has just spoke to Penny Bright. Now, those of you who know Penny Bright, and many of you in Auckland will know that she has refused to pay her rates since 2007. Auckland Council is now moving against her. We'll hear from her after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Prime Minister says her government wants to make a fresh start at Waitangi this year and she'll head north early next month and stay for 5 days. Jacinda Ardern says Waitangi is about more than just 1 day. Our Māori Issues correspondent Mihi Narangi Forbes reports.
Ms Ardern's decision to stay so long at Waitangi is unprecedented. She told media today she wants to make full use of a time when people are gathered there to meet them as a government that wants to form open, transparent relationships. The veteran activist and Ngāpuhi Kuia, Tite Whai Harawira, will escort Ms Ardern onto the marae next month. Mrs Harawira, who is well into her 80s, says she's looking forward to escorting the Prime Minister and hopes to spend some time with her. Last year, when he was Prime Minister, Bill English boycotted Waitangi and spent the day in Auckland. Ko mihi ngā rangi Forbes, aho.
Meanwhile, as the political year gets underway, Ms Ardern has outlined her immediate priorities. Cabinet meets for the first time this year tomorrow, after which she says she'll make an announcement about an inquiry into mental health services. Later in the week, she'll flag the government's planned changes to employment law, but she says that won't include introducing fair pay agreements yet.
We long flagged that that was something we felt we needed to spend extra time working alongside both our union and business communities to make sure that we get that right. So we're putting that on a longer track.
Jacinda Ardern says she's confident the government will achieve everything promised in its first 100 days, which end in less than 2 weeks. Water Safety New Zealand is hoping a soon-to-be-published report showing just how stretched the sector is will convince the government more funding is needed. Surf lifesavers say basic advice is being ignored at places like Muriwai, Piha and Bethel's Beach, where 35 people had to be rescued at the weekend. The Chief Executive of Water Safety New Zealand, Jonty Mills, says it's disappointing the message is not getting through, but organisations like Surf Lifesaving also need more funding.
We know that the sector is stretched beyond its capability, and we know that there is an increased demand and an increase in expectation from the water safety sector, the likes of Surf Lifesaving being a good example. And so we certainly need to make the authorities aware of that.
Jonty Mills says the review will be completed in the next few months and presented to the government. A Kapahaka star has started a campaign encouraging women to get a smear test. Te Arawa's Talai Morrison is using her own experience with cervical cancer to push the idea. Many haka groups around the country have been practising over the summer holidays in preparation for the upcoming regional competitions. Ms Morrison is encouraging all female performers to include a smear test in their practice schedule.
I see all my friends and my family going off to Kapahaka every single weekend to practice for their regional competition. And I'm sitting at home going, you know what, this sucks. I have to buy a ticket to my own regional competition. And if I had simply got my smear, I would be at Kapahaka practice right now.
Talai Morrison of Te Arawa. A new report says the standard of infrastructure in the Cook Islands is not up to handling the growing number of visitors. The report in the recently released half-year economic and fiscal update says the country's biggest industry could be under threat if continued growth is not matched by improved infrastructure. About 160,000 people are expected to visit the Cook Islands this year, and the report says such an influx is causing problems for the environment. An opposition MP, Selina Napa, is calling for a cap on the number allowed in. The Auckland Council will take its case against a woman who refused to pay rates to the High Court. It says it will ask the court to sell the Kingsland home of Penny Bright, who hasn't paid rates since 2007. Its acting Group Chief Financial Officer, Matthew Walker, says the council got a judgment against Ms Bright back in January 2016 and now want to go ahead with the sale of the property. He says while the council would have preferred not to reach this point, it needs to be fair to the thousands of Aucklanders who do pay their rates. The police in Wanaka are calling for witnesses of an attack at a local tourist attraction. Detective Alan Lee says 3 men assaulted an Australian tourist at the Puzzling World Maze about 3:30 yesterday afternoon after he tried to stop them verbally abusing an Indian man. The tourist was not seriously injured. Mr Lee says the police are looking for a black Mazda ute, number plate ABA 406, that had a quad bike on the back. It's 6:05. To sport, and New Zealand are chasing just 106 to win the first 2020 Cricket International against Pakistan in Wellington. Sent in to bat after losing the toss, the visitors crumbled to be all out for 105 in the 20th over. Tim Southee and Seth Rance picked up 3 wickets each, while spinners Mitchell Santner and Ish Sodhi were also impressive in the first game of the 3 matches. And a short time ago, and I have absolutely no idea, the New Zealand were something for something after the something over in reply. Novak Djokovic is hoping experience will help him get through the second week at the Australian Tennis Open. Just back from a long injury break, the 6-time Australian champion has dropped just 1 set in his first 3 matches in Melbourne. The 14th seed plays South Korea's Hyun Chung in the 4th round tonight.
Someone that is very disciplined and is one of the next gens. He won in Milano last year, so I mean he's playing great. I mean he's fit. He's doesn't have too many holes in his game. He's a hard worker and it pays off. So into second week, it's going to be a game of small margins. So let's see what happens.
Novak Djokovic. Also in 4th round action tonight are defending men's champion Roger Federer and the women's top seed Simona Halep. And in American football, the New England Patriots and the Philadelphia Eagles have won their respected conference championship matches and will play off for the 52nd Super Bowl in 2 weeks. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alan Gilmore takes a look at Venus, our nearest planetary neighbour. If you want to know what happens when you get runaway greenhouse gas emissions, check it out. There's a window on the world of wine and the search for low alcohol varieties that still taste good. And there's an extended studio session with the Kiwi-born Spanish-based flamenco guitarist Paul Basalda. So join me, Brian Crump, back on air tonight after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
New Zealand is 16 for 2 in the 5th over. Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Rain becoming widespread later today or overnight, with isolated thunderstorms and localised downpours easing later tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Manawatu, Gisborne and to Wairarapa. Occasional showers, some thundery with possible downpours during the afternoons and evenings, especially inland tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington, Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Northern Westland. Occasional rain clearing this afternoon or evening, then mostly fine with isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. For southern Westland and Fiordland, rain or showers. Canterbury, cloudy periods today with isolated showers inland, possibly heavy, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, scattered showers today, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms inland, fine tomorrow apart from showers in southern and Southland after dark. And the Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle. It is 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. The Labour Party caucus has been holding a retreat in the southern Wairarapa township of Martinborough, wine country of course, where temperatures have been drifting in the 25 to 30 range. Remember, this is a triangular government, Labour, New Zealand First and the Greens. So this was a chance for Labour to discuss its particular objectives before taking them back to the melting pot of coalition government. And it was also a chance, as our political reporter May Heron told us via Live View, to take stock of progress on stated objectives for their first 100 days.
Yeah, so basically in less than 2 weeks, on Saturday the 3rd of February marks the Labour Party's 100th day in office, and it means before then they've still got a few things that they need to tick off. That means they need to detail the state of abuse inquiry in terms of what the framework of that's going to be, as well as the mental health inquiry, and they've got some legislative work to get through as well. They need to announce the changes they're going to be making to some employment legislation, as well as Jacinda Ardern's very own child poverty bill. That's where she's going to set some targets and in terms of reducing child poverty. So those things need to happen before in less than 2 weeks basically. But she's pretty confident that she can get all of that done. And then after that, they're going to start focusing on the rest of the year, what's going to happen in the other 300 days of this year. And so that's what really this caucus meeting is about. It's about trying to find out what their priorities are, and that's why they're all meeting here in Martinborough, where they're going to be discussing the priorities ahead.
Yes, looking very civilised behind you there, May, for people who are watching. It's a nice place to meet. Let's talk about those targets for the reduction of child poverty. Confusion because of the Treasury miscalculations. What was the Prime Minister saying about those targets specifically?
Well, basically she's trying to separate what the government is trying to do and what the Treasury has done here. So the Treasury has made a mistake. It has failed to properly calculate how many children will be lifted out of poverty due to Labour's package, as well as actually National's package announced last year. Yeah. And so the Prime Minister is saying that her targets will be separate to this, that she will be basically setting a target for the government to bring down child poverty, but it has nothing to do with what the Treasury did, which was to calculate how many children will be lifted out of poverty as a result of the numbers. And she's basically saying that her package is still good, that she reckons that people will still be lifted out of poverty, and so she's confident that what Labour has offered is still top-notch, basically.
She didn't just say it was good, she said it was bloody good, didn't she, May? I was watching it come in. She's fairly excited about this announcement, isn't she?
Yes, she is, and she's also excited about a few of the other targets that she hopes to be setting. She announced today that she's going to be replacing National's Better Public Services program, which was a whole lot of targets that National set to make public services better. She's going to be replacing those targets with some of her very own. Now, she wouldn't give us details to what those targets will include, but she did hint that they would look at something like better housing. It would also address better educational targets, and so those are expected to be announced in the next few weeks as well.
Right, 100 days is coming to an end. Of course, Labour won all the Māori seats, meaning the end of the Māori Party as a parliamentary presence. And as a reflection of this, a big Labour delegation going to Ratana, of course, and also the Prime Minister spending how long at Waitangi?
Yeah, so she's spending 5 days up in Waitangi, and she mentioned that today actually, that it was a big priority for her to be a presence in Waitangi. Obviously this is very different to what the Prime Minister Bill English did last year when he was Prime Minister. He avoided Waitangi and said it was about the entire country, and so Jacinda Ardern is being very specific here that she's going to be spending 5 days up in Waitangi, and this is her way of sending a message that this is important for her government, that Waitangi Day and the issues surrounding Waitangi Day is important for her government, and so she will be spending longer than usual for a Prime Minister there.
Right, fascinating weeks ahead, and we look forward to covering all this stuff as it happens, including the details of the child poverty announcement and what takes place at both Ratana and Waitangi. But the subject that was also being discussed, of course, May Heron, is babies, and not only the Prime Minister's impending baby, which is growing inside her as we speak, as they tend to do when women are pregnant, but also the other babies in the caucus, right, who have been there en masse.
Yes, there's been a lot of children about. There's been some backyard cricket, some crying, some screaming. But yeah, this is a chance for a lot of the Labour MPs to bring their own family members here, and so that they can get to know each other better too. So we've had Kitty Allen, her newborn there, Willow Jean Prime, Chris Hipkins, Chris Farfoy. So they've all brought their kids, and it's been a bit of a child-friendly environment here, and that's kind of what Labour is hoping that they can bring into Parliament and encourage to have in Parliament. But you're right, it's been a lot of baby talk here. Essentially, this for a lot of the MPs will be the first time since they've seen Jacinda Ardern since she announced her news last Friday, and so there were lots of hugs, lots of congratulations, lots of kisses. And again today she talked a bit about how she didn't reveal the fact that she the gender of her child during a media interview this morning, so there's still lots of discussion about it.
Our political reporter May Heron from Martinborough, which looked hot and dry earlier this afternoon. The veteran activist Penny Bright, this is in Auckland now, has refused to pay her rates for over 10 years, and she is, it seems, set to lose her home. The Auckland Council has a High Court judgment awarding them over $35,000 in outstanding rates and penalties and a further $20,000 in costs. Now they want to force the sale of Ms Bright's inner city home to recover the costs. Now Penny Bright says it's the third time the council have gone after her home. She spoke a short time ago to our reporter Edward Gay.
My message to the council is comply with the rule of law yourself and tell ratepayers exactly where rates monies are being spent on private sector contractors and consultants, as you are required to do under Section 17 of the Public Records Act 2005. This is absolutely atrocious council municipal bullying and harassment. Who is holding Auckland Council accountable to the rule of law? I'm getting really sick of this.
What do you say to the ratepayers who have paid their rates?
Well, I would ask them, do they think they're getting value for money? Do they care about transparency? Am I the only person in Auckland who's worried about where rates money is being spent? Because I think that there should be hundreds of thousands of Aucklanders who actually now start saying, well, in fact, Penny Bright's got a point, actually.
They say they've tried to phone you, they've tried to have discussions with you, that this is a last resort. I mean, have you returned their phone calls? Have they been leaving messages with you?
I don't have any message from Auckland Council on this latest round. And what I would say to them is, you know that I have been absolutely unyielding and unbending from the beginning. I will not pay rates until the books are open and the council complies with the law.
I don't mean to sound facetious, but I mean, have you continued to put your rubbish and recycling out over the last 10 years?
Yes, I have. Has the council complied with their requirement to provide me with the democratic services that I'm entitled to and explain where exactly those rates have been spent? Because they haven't covered their part of the bargain, actually.
It looks like now that you're going to lose your home.
Oh, rubbish. No, I will not lose my home. If they are initiating proceedings in the High Court again, it's a 6-month process. Because that's what happens. It's a 6-month process. And I've been through this process before. And twice, it's, well, I've still got the house.
That was Penny Bright talking to our reporter Edward Gay. The council's acting group chief financial officer Matthew Walker said taking action to recover rates was a last resort, but the council has written to Ms Bright regularly and offered to meet with her. He said while the council would prefer not to have reached this point, it needs to be fair to the thousands of Aucklanders who do pay their rates. Ms Bright's Kingsland home, Kingsland is a suburb adjacent to Eden Park there, has a capital value of just over $1 million. Mr Walker says once the rates and penalties have been recovered, the remainder of the money will be given to Ms Bright. Stay tuned. We suspect lots of you have opinions on Penny Bright every time she appears on Checkpoint, or in fact gets talked about on Checkpoint. I don't think we've had her on terribly often, but you can text us on that issue 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Are you, as Auckland ratepayers, getting the services that Penny Bright clearly thinks you are not getting? We'd love to hear from you. Just before we move on, the cricket, Pakistan, a really miserable total of 105 all out in a T20 game. T20 is the shortened version of one-day cricket. It's like receiving cricket by telegram, 20 overs only. It's very rare for a team to be bowled out. Pakistan were for 105. New Zealand making heavy weather of chasing that target. 30 for 2 now. Colin Munro, who was a fantastic batsman for New Zealand, of course, copped a really nasty hit on the wrist as he was going for a run. He looks to have recovered. The physio's been out there. New Zealand 30 for 2, chasing a miserable total of 105. A second day of women's marches has taken place around the world, with many protesting against President Trump on the anniversary of his inauguration. There were events in London and Paris, but perhaps the biggest gathering was in Las Vegas in the US. That's following huge gatherings, of course, yesterday in Washington, Chicago, New York and Los Angeles. The biggest one today in Las Vegas. The BBC's Rajini Vajanathan was there and filed this report.
From Paris to London to Las Vegas, women have been making their voices heard.
This is what democracy looks like.
Last year we were angry, and that's why we turned out. This year we're organized, and that's why we're turning out.
I'm empowered, and I'm ready to get people talking about these issues and get people excited about them.
A year into Donald Trump's presidency, and the focus isn't just on the man himself, but his policies. Many believe his immigration plans and cuts he's made to abortion funding and contraception access adversely affect women.
How he's pushing to make birth control less accessible for women is just ridiculous. How he's supposed to be for the people, but he's against the people. He's against everyone that's here, and that's why I'm here today.
And in the wake of the Me Too movement and a growing conversation around equal pay, many are here to fight on other issues. For Amy, who came here today with her 5-year-old daughter Charlie, this is personal.
For 12 years I was the victim of domestic violence that my children observed. Now I'm free, finally, thank goodness, through no help of the systems that were meant to protect us. And I'm here to hope that the world will listen and we can create systemic change to help little girls like Charlie and myself.
And one way organisers think that change can happen is by getting more women to register to vote and even to run for office. They're channeling their energy on this year's midterm congressional elections. This state of Nevada was picked for this rally because it's a swing state. With a Senate seat, Democrats believe they can win back from the Republicans. There may be thousands of women here protesting Donald Trump, but don't forget that he won the election with a majority of white women voters, and many of those think he is doing a great job for women. And so, like so many issues here in the United States, even that of women's rights is one where this country is deeply divided.
Deeply divided. That's the BBC's Rajini Vajanathan talking to us, well, filing from Las Vegas earlier this afternoon. It's 21 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. It's been a tough summer for New Zealand's rarest native bird. The fairy tern population hovers at around just 40 birds, and in a really good year this can raise a dozen chicks, but this summer they're down to only 6 for the season, half of a good year and way less than what was hoped for. Fairy terns breed on just a few beaches north of Auckland, making scrapes in the sand for nests. Obviously, people have to keep off those beaches, and this year the staunch little birds have been up against it with storms and huge tides. Our Northern reporter Lois Williams has been talking to Heather Rogan from the New Zealand Fairy Tern Trust.
At Waipu, 2 chicks were washed away in high tides. At Pakari, a nest was washed away twice, and the birds did nest again a 3rd time, and so they did get 1 chick away there. Mangawai was some lovely posters made by local school children.
So the birds still only about 40 left, yeah?
Yes, I think we can say that the population is fairly static, really.
It's only just hanging in there, really, isn't it? Because
just hanging in there, yes. Yeah. I think they're just hanging on for survival. There's so many sort of threats to their survival. You know, the ongoing coastal development, pressures on not only the places where they nest, but also on their feeding areas. So it's a difficult life for the little bird.
They're pretty staunch, though, aren't they? I mean, imagine that, having a nest washed away twice and having another crack at it, and finally getting an egg to hatch.
Yes, that was very impressive, actually. Yes, but it's also, there's great work done by people on the ground. I mean, the ranger at Pakari who actually rescued the eggs from and then actually dug trenches around to try to save the nesting area.
Rescued the nest from what?
Oh, from the incoming tide. Yes, this is the ranger at Pakari actually put sandbags around the nesting site and dug trenches, and they did the same over at the rangers over at Papakanui did the same, and also at Waipu. So there's a lot of work goes into trying to protect the nests. There are volunteer groups at Waipu, at Mangawhai and at Pakari, all of whom usually go out and monitor the nests on the rangers' days off. So there's always somebody there watching them.
And people generally are respecting those areas, those nesting areas.
On the whole, yes, I think it's been fair to say that people have respected the areas. There was one really interesting, unusual incident at Waipu this year. The volunteers noticed that the parent bird was coming into one of the nests looking very blue, and the fish that the bird brought in for the chicks there was also blue. It appeared that there was some kind of blue substance in the estuary there where they were feeding, and this was fed to the chicks. Shortly afterwards, the chicks were predated, and one of the parent birds has disappeared. That was a very mysterious thing that Northern Regional Council and the Department of Conservation both investigated, but were unable to find out exactly what had happened. Whether it was dye or whether it was some kind of cleaning solution, goodness knows what it was.
That is our Northern reporter Lois Williams talking to Heather Rogan from the New Zealand Fair Return Trust. The wonderful thing about asking for feedback is we get it, and the wonderful thing is that it's often a tomato-tomato situation. This is a classic example of the genre. Penny Bright is completely in the right, says one person. Penny Bright is such a yawn, says another. So let's have the completely in the right person first. The Auckland City Council entirely in the wrong. It is corruptly run, a legally constituted organisation that runs roughshod over elected councillors and ratepayers, has crooked contracting arrangements and is out of control. Its CEO should be sacked forthwith, its legal and financial officers likewise, and the lot should be jailed. Goodness gracious me. So that is somebody who agrees entirely with Penny Bright. This person says she's a yawn. There's always going to be points to protest, but you don't get other people championing your case when you don't pay your rates like they do. I think the council could also always provide more than they do, have lower wage and consultant costs. But I also acknowledge they deserve funding from residents to continue to offer existing services with the promise to do better in the future. Wonderfully, they are the same takes, two takes on the same person and the same situation. Thank you. It's nice to hear from you. Someone asking, is there still another channel other than Freeview 50 through which we can watch Checkpoint? Great to have you back, by the way. Well, we're delighted to be back. And yes, the answer to that question is, by golly, there seem to be thousands of them. We are a multi-media program, multi, very much the operative word. So you can watch us on Freeview Channel 50. If you have Sky, you can watch us on Sky 83. If you have the internet, you can watch us on Facebook. Just Google search Checkpoint RNZ Facebook, you will find us. Or you can watch us on the RNZ website. Go to the RNZ website and find Checkpoint. You can watch us live streaming there, or you can watch us on YouTube. If there's a screen, you'll find us there. Or, as many of you are still doing, you can listen to us on the wireless. However you're joining us, thank you. Finally tonight, our first show back for the year. Virtual reality is gaining traction in New Zealand's gaming community, but those with a weak stomach will find it a disconcerting experience on occasion. For some people, it's similar to sailors getting their sea legs. And now there are a number of forums dedicated to helping gamers gain their VR, virtual reality legs. Truly, this is a thing. Science and Innovation reporter Charlie Drever filed this report.
Virtual reality is proving a hit at Acco Gamers Club on Wellington's Courtney Place. Owner Jack Bajent says there's about a 50-50 split on those choosing VR over traditional gaming. But what's surprising is despite men 30 and over being their biggest customers, there's a mix of people playing.
Whereas like the console games have kind of got the usual people that come in, and then VR's quite a vast variety from 70-year-old woman to 8-year-old kids wanting to play it. Females book it for their partners because I think they can both play instead of the guy sitting at the console at home.
But Jack Bajent wasn't a big fan at first, and like others experienced VR sickness.
I think the first game I played was the Star Wars one, and that was just amazing. But then I had to test the flight simulator, Yeah, and I don't like flying in general, and yeah, that was one of those ones where I went, oh my gosh, now I actually feel sick from this, and I didn't think this was going to happen to me because I played heaps of games and stuff. Yeah, no, that was a moment. I went, this is really full on.
He recommends people play in groups and take regular breaks so they can get the best experience. New Zealand VR and AR Association Executive Director Courtney Lomas recommends people make sure their headset is fitted properly, taking ginger and having a fan nearby blowing cool air. She adds games with lag increase the possibility of feeling nauseous and describes the feeling as inverted motion sickness.
If you're going on a windy road, your body's telling you, oh, you're going on a really windy road, but if your eyes are looking at the horizon, they're quite steady. In VR, it's practically inverted. Your eyes are generally believing that you're walking around or flying or whatever you're experiencing, but it's your body that's telling you, no, you're actually sitting down or standing stationary.
However, many games and devices are incorporating more movement into virtual reality, and VR Kiwi CEO Rachel Hatch says she's developed a treadmill-type device for gaming.
Because the headsets have really come along nicely, combined with you actually are, as you physically move, at the same time you are within the experience. There's no lag.
Ms Hatch says those who have experienced a sickly feeling have felt a big difference once they're able to move. Despite the small downside, many others are still loving the experience. And Ben Williams, who went to Acco Gamers Club for a birthday party, is no exception.
It's way cooler because it's basically like you're playing it in real life.
Although for the sickly type, perhaps bring a packet of ginger nuts. For Checkpoint, I'm Charlie Drever.
Charlie Drever ending the programme for tonight, except for two more tomato pieces of feedback on Penny Bright. John, paying rates and taxes is part of the social contract. This protest is not noble. It is selfish and ineffective. On one hand, on the other, Penny Bright is on a quest for accountability. Whoever thinks that is a yawn is truly asleep. What a wonderful audience you are, so capable of seeing the same thing in such different ways. Do I contradict myself? Very well. I contradict myself. I am whole. I contain multitudes. Walt Whitman, ending Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she's confident the government will achieve all it promised in its first 100 days. The police in Dunedin are still working to formally identify 2 people who died in a fire in a South Dunedin flat this morning. Fuel companies are investigating elevated levels of sulphur as a possible reason why some drivers are reporting inaccurate readings on their fuel gauges. The Auckland Council will take its case against Penny Bright, who refused to pay rates, to the High Court. The police in Wanaka are calling for witnesses to an attack on a tourist at the Puzzling World Maze yesterday afternoon. And New Zealand are chasing 106 to win the first T20 Cricket International against Pakistan in Wellington. A short time ago, they were 41 for 2 in the 9th over. Our next news and weather is at 7.
My 2 dogs are my best mates. We have Tess,